Ladies, gentlemen, and Forge Knights of all ages, Borderlands 4 had its first major balance patch recently, chock full of buffs for every Vault Hunter, or I guess more accurately, chock full of buffs, and there were buffs for every Vault Hunter because Harlow got 2 minor changes, but Amon got a whole light novel worth of buffs. So today we're going to dive into Amon, talk about the new best build I've been messing around with that utilizes these buffs from the patch, how it plays, and how to put it together for yourself. First up, what's the point of it all? What's it doing? Well, the main goal here is Forgeskill spamming. Forgeskill is Amon's passive trait. It gives him a secondary function to each action skill that requires a press and hold command, and a large number of the Forgeskill options were buffed. The capstones were buffed, and the biggest buffs in general were to the Onslaughter capstone Forge skills, so those were the ones that I really wanted to focus on, especially as Onslaughter, I would say, is the skill that generally sees the least use in super duper high-end builds for Amon. The main thing that we get from this then is, first off, we are immune for 6 seconds after using a Forge skill. So the closer we get to a 6-second Forge skill cooldown, the closer we get to full immortality. And while it may not be 100% consistent in active combat, with having to move around and follow enemies and stuff like that factored in a perfect ideal situation, like if you're hitting a training dummy, you can absolutely hit a 6-second Forge skill cooldown refresh, which would make you functionally immortal. That said, we pair this up in a couple of different ways. The main thing that we're mixing it with is melee, as the Onslaughter Forge skills do melee damage, and that means that this is essentially a new variation of an Amon melee build. And for a quick mention, the original melee build that we have for Amon on the channel is still doing extremely well. If anything, it is stronger after the buffs, even with no actual changes to the skill tree or anything, and this patch just made it way better. And I would say in comparison to this melee Amon build, that one has faster ramp up potential and higher burst damage as a result, but it is far less tanky. It does not have access to literal immortality in this way. So I would argue that this one is better for general mobbing because of how the rocket punch works in comparison to just running around with the axes, plus Forge skill fun as well. So if you want pure damage and axe melee focus, go check that other build out. If you want still massive damage with a healthy mix of immortality periods, rocket punch, large AoE melee attacks, and Forge skill spam, this is the one for you. All that said, the main loop of this is pretty fun. I'll be giving 2 options, but my preferred version of this is with the Stormcutter capstone. This makes your Forge skill become a Forge wave that fires forwards, that restores action skill cooldown, action skill duration if it's active, and also Ordinance cooldown too. This combined with being able to launch it off every 6 seconds or so in our setup means that our Ordinance is super frequently available too, which is great, and it also means we have our action skill pretty much whenever we want to use it. That said, let's dive into how we put the whole thing together, starting off with the skill tree itself. The vast majority of our points today will be in the red tree Calamity, and we are also going to be using the Onslaughter action skill. This gives 15% shield regeneration per second while active, which is buffed since the balance patch. This is a nice combo for bonus damage in our setup too. It gives us movement speed bonus as well, which is nice, and a bonus incendiary damage with guns, but we don't use guns a whole lot, so that part doesn't really help. As well, it changes our regular melee into a rocket punch, which lunges into enemies, and the rocket punch effect itself has had its damage boosted quite a lot in this balance patch, which does help us a fair bit. With this, I recommend the Fellfrost Augment specifically, as it gives us a melee attack follow-up for our melee attack, and the follow-up has large range, making it incredibly useful for mobbing while still counting as being a melee attack. And even outside of the range, having the follow-up makes the force delay between rocket punches a little bit less of a detriment, as it speeds up the total hits per second, essentially. As for the actual skill points then, 5 points into the Discombobulate node for 25% melee crit chance straight up, clear use for us. 3 points into Gut Punch lets us apply the weakened debuff, both from Ordinance and melee damage, to both reduced enemy damage output towards us and increase their damage taken quite a significant amount. 5 points into the Titanium Knuckles skill is a load of both melee and skill damage gained. Skill does apply to things like the Forge skill itself, which is also technically melee, but while the Forge skill counts as melee damage, it does not count as a melee attack, and we will get into why that's important a bit later on. Either way, this is a big damage boost for us. It applies to our melees, it applies to our rocket punches as well, and this node was actually buffed quite a bit in the recent balance patch too. It used to be 35% and 15% at 5 ranks respectively, so this is nice to have regardless. We then put 1 point into Forged in Steel. This gives us full damage immunity for 6 seconds after we activate a Forge skill, which is a touch incorrect wording, as this actually takes place after the Forgeskill animation finishes. If you use a big hammer, for example, the immunity period does not take place until the hammer hits the ground. It doesn't start when you start the animation. That is important to know for this playstyle, but this is a really powerful component of the setup. We then take 1 rank of the best defense over here, just for 3% of our melee damage granted back to us as overshield, and our melee damage is both so frequent and so high, this gives us a ton of survivability even in between the Forgeskill uses. This then unlocks the branches for this tree, and that's where this gets a little bit funky. We're going to start by putting 5 points into Berserk. This is an unbelievably strong passive node, even more so within this setup. When you use a Forgeskill, you activate the Berserk buff. This gives you immunity to slow and also bonus cryo damage on gun and melee damage, and this is a really important part of the setup, to the point that the best use of our class mod is entirely just finding 5 extra ranks of Berserk on it. We also take 3 points into There Is Only Red. This adds kill skill scaling stacking to Berserk. My default with my full 10 ranks Berserk is 60% of damage applied as bonus cold damage. This node increases that by 60% per kill for 600% maximum increase to that bonus damage, which put simply is just a massive damage multiplier, especially if you can stack it up quickly. We then take 2 points into Brimming Vigor. This gives us higher maximum health threshold, but more importantly it gives increased melee damage depending on how full our health is. We should pretty much always be at full health, so this will be fully active. We then put 3 points into My Touch is Death. This gives any melee damage a 24% chance to activate kill skills. Specifically, the important use of this is for There Is Only Red. We start our boss fights by just applying melee damage from as many sources as possible, as quickly as possible, to trigger the kill skills through the ability to do that with melee damage, and we can get this to its full bonus, which then makes us scale to the moon. We're then going to be picking up 5 points into Dragon Breath. This is mostly just to be used as a backup or a secondary bonus. We spam out Ordinance frequently. This makes your next gunshot after using Ordinance use Convert to Incendiary and do a ton of bonus damage, as well as applying a stagger. I don't use guns in the footage a whole lot, but you absolutely can use a gun while playing in this build, and the damage will be immense because of the combination of Berserk and all the bonus cryo damage, so it is just a great combo in general to add this on. The main reason that we take 5 points here though is so we can pick up 5 ranks in Fists of Stone. This makes any melee damage restore 5% of our Forgeskill cooldown. This is doubled on actual melee attacks, and this is an important distinction too. Melee attacks are specifically when you press the melee button, or in the case of Onslaughter, our action skill, the rocket punch itself does count as a melee attack too, even when you press it with the action field button, because it is effectively a melee override. It replaces your melee attack, so it is your melee attack. We have plenty of sources of melee damage in general within the build, but the only one that actually counts as a melee attack is your own punches, whether standard or rocket. Even the big Forgeskill itself counts as melee damage, but not an actual melee attack. This also brings us to our capstone choice here, and you have a full set of 3 options here that are all applicable for different reasons. The best one, in my opinion, is the one that you'll see me use the most, which is Stormcutter. This does solid damage in itself with the actual Forge Wave, and it gives action skill cooldown and duration restoration, as well as Ordnance restoration too, for every enemy that it hits. This has the longest cooldown of our 3 Forgeskill choices, but the secondary benefits from it are huge. On top of being one that launches out the fastest as an animation, the time spent actually swinging it is minimal. This makes immortality looping much easier too, through the node that gives us Forgeskill immortality. The second option here then is Horcleave. This we have also unlocked on the other side because of our points spent. It is the lowest damage dealing Forgeskill option here, but the lowest cooldown option as well. Its secondary effects aren't that big of a deal, and it really lumps you into the cryo damage bucket instead of having a bit of a damage split like the other option does, so this one is not my personal recommendation, but it is an option, so I thought I should mention it. Third option is no capstone at all. This would give you just regular Molten Slam as your actual Forgeskill, which has a cooldown right in the middle of the two. It is by far the coolest animation option of all of these, is it brings you into third person and you slam down the big fiery hammer and it's sick. It's sort of a good median choice of cooldown between the other two, but it suffers from having no secondary bonuses and from a long actual animation. So basically you would use this if you just like the feeling of using a giant hammer more than using the Forge Wave capstone replacements, which I totally respect, but Stormcutter is the best choice for pure build power purposes. Not to mention that while it has the highest cooldown of these three options, it lowers our Ordnance cooldown. Our Ordnance will be doing melee damage, which means that it lowers our Forgeskill cooldown, so it very much loops into being lower on its own cooldown as a result as well. The rest of our skill points then will be going into the green tree, Cybernetics. 5 points into Cast Iron. This gives us increased Forgeskill cooldown rate, which is great, and a bit of gun handling too. Gun handling, if anything, is sort of a negative at the moment because it's bugged to lower projectile speed, which is pretty weird, but that doesn't affect our melee, so it's not a big deal. The Forgeskill cooldown rate part of this, of course, helps us out a lot, and importantly lets us hit the next row. We're going to also be taking 4 points into Gathering Storm right here. This is a kill skill that gives us stacks of increased elemental damage for a duration. Pretty much all the damage that we deal is elemental, except for the bonus kinetic from Groundbreaker itself, so this increases the actual stacking rate of Groundbreaker as a result. That said, this will stack up nicely because we have the ability to trigger kill skills through our melee attacks, so we should always have this very, very active. We then put 1 point into Tempered Pyre, and what this does is create a Forge Drone that lasts for 20 seconds after we use our Forge skill. This Forge Drone does incendiary melee damage, so every time the drone hits an enemy, it lowers our Forge skill cooldown. Its duration is also long enough that it will basically be permanent uptime with our setup. We then also pick up 1 point, our final point, into Twin Tempers. This adds on a second Forge Drone when you use your Forge skill, this one being a cryo melee damage drone. This also reduces the duration of these Forge Drones, but we still have them at 100% uptime anyways because of how frequently we use the Forge skill. This will have you getting 2 drones automatically going around meleeing any enemy around to activate your kill skills and keep all of your buffs sort of rolling and lower your Forge skill cooldown constantly, even when you're not actually hitting things. That does it for the skill tree then, so let's jump over to our specialization points. First, 20 points right into the runner on the right side. Increased melee damage and movement speed are both great for us. We take bare arms, so melee damage benefits from half of the increases to gun damage. We pick up Bullet Train for the meantime for what is effectively 7.5% bonus melee damage while walking around, combined with bare arms. And we most importantly then grab Groundbreaker. This is a very funky interaction, whether it's a bug or not is essentially up to dev interpretation because it's a bit of a technicality. But this is the main damage engine of this build and most melee builds in the game. This tallies up and counts all non-melee attack damage that you do, meaning any damage that doesn't come directly from you pressing the melee button or doing a rocket punch. Those are the only 2 things in our kit that count as melee attacks specifically. When you then do an actual melee attack or ground slam, it adds bonus damage as kinetic damage for a portion of what you dealt. The potential bug with this is that it tallies up and counts the damage from Berserk. Berserk looks at our melee attack, sees the damage that it does, then gives us bonus cryo damage applied for a portion of that melee attack damage. Groundbreaker will not count up the melee attack damage, and the entire point of that is so you can't just melee repeatedly and have it build up, but it does count the bonus cryo from Berserk. This is then tallied up and added into our next melee attack as a result. The increased damage from Groundbreaker is then used in the calculation for Berserk's bonus damage, which then gets added into the next Groundbreaker, and this essentially just creates an infinite feedback loop where if you can melee enough times in a row without a 5-second break in between them, you can completely break the entire damage calculations of the whole game, because it can hit literally infinite damage. I'm leaning towards saying that this is unintended, but I also don't think it's technically a bug because that's just how the different damage type tags work. Bonus damage is not the same as its source, so bonus cryo damage from melee attacks makes sense to apply to this. All that said, when you have enough specialization points to get this perk, that is when I recommend you would start using this build. Any earlier than that, and you'll still manage fine on lower UVH, but it won't be the level of power that I'm showing in the footage today on Ultimate Vault Hunter Mode 5. As for the points after that, that sort of depends. The default choice would be to spend 20 points at a sharpshooter and pick up 1 shot, 1 kill. This won't affect our melee damage, but it will make any excess melee damage we do when mobbing, then apply a massive damage bonus to our gun, so we can melee for a load of damage, then start shooting hefty shots as well if we want to too. Again, I don't use the gun much in the footage, but the build absolutely works with more of a gun focus if you want to, and this helps a lot. The alternate option to this would be if your health capacity is higher than your shield capacity, which is fairly specific. It would depend on the bonus stats that you have on like your class mod. You would instead have spent those 20 points in Survivor on the left to pick up the best offense perk. My personal shield amount is higher than my health amount. I constantly run on empty shields because of how the build works, and so this would be a non-existent bonus for me, but it is something to consider based on your stats. An alternative option would instead then to be points into Daredevil so you can get a honed mind. Specifically, the rocket punch during Onslaughter, during the action skill, does count as both action skill skill and melee attack, so it would benefit from this a fair bit. But we mostly only use the actual action skill for either mobbing, where we already do more than enough rocket punch damage without this, or for bosses when they fly up into the sky, which is a pretty specific scenario. Otherwise, just do what I've done here, just start shoving more points into the runner, get more melee damage, more movement speed. With that covered, then let's talk about equipment, starting with guns. As I've mentioned, I don't use the guns much as actual guns, but they can be useful in this anyways. The important one you'll see me use for bosses is this blue Ripper sniper rifle. The main thing that you want is Alt Fire Target Marker. This increases the hit enemy's damage taken by a fairly large amount for 8 seconds, which helps us ramp up our damage at the start of a fight way faster for bosses. This can spawn on any Ripper manufactured sniper rifle, so just look out for Ripper snipers and see if they have this attachment on them. Another great build component that I don't use much in this footage but absolutely does synergize with the setup is the Spread Launcher Underbarrel attachment. This fires off a spread of impact grenades that do a buttload of damage. My roll is solid, but I've seen them go up to like 35,000 per grenade, which would be over like 150,000 base damage before factoring any build components, and that is nuts. But the idea is normally this is dangerous to use because to use it properly you'd have to use it at close range and it does splash damage, but we have constant immortality, so we can use this at close range no problem, and the damage from the spread launcher then funnels into Groundbreaker to increase the damage of our next melee, and so it can also boost the ramp up speed of the build. It is a tool to make it just work faster and harder, but seeing as this one is a bit harder to get a good hold of, I didn't really want to use it in most of the boss kill clips just to show you how strong we are even without a spread launcher. But this one does spawn specifically on Jakobs shotguns, with the highest damage variations being on Jakobs shotguns that only have one bullet in the magazine. Aside from that, just having a nice general damage weapon is good for if you get downed and you need to second wind yourself back up. I am a big fan of Rainbow Vomit for general use personally, and it can also roll with Spread Launcher on it, even though generally it will be lower damage variations than a non-legendary would get. For your rep kit, this is not required for the build, but I've got triple bypass for maximum uptime on the hard hitter effect. This is straight up 40% bonus damage for 10 seconds after using it, and with the way that this rep kit works in mobbing, you will have 100% uptime with it. In bossing, no boss will live longer than 30 seconds, so 100% uptime as well. This rep kit, or honestly any rep kit that has the hard hitter effect, the enrage effect, those type of things will affect the damage that we're doing and are quite good for this setup if you can apply them frequently. This one, it just gives you high uptime, and enrage on this would also be quite good. As for how to get this for yourself, this one is a dedicated drop from the Back Hive, which is the boss of the Augur Mines that you can reach outside of the front door of Zadra's backup plan lab in the Fade Fields region. For your ordnance, we're going to be using the Slippy Grenade. This is a silly little bouncing exploding fish that deals melee damage when it explodes instead of pure ordnance damage. This means that we can use it to trigger our kill skills en masse, as each grenade splits into 3 grenades when thrown, and then they all bounce 3 times, so you can get 9 hits from each ordnance usage. The only real danger with this is, especially with high melee damage stacking, these can absolutely one-shot you yourself as well, but we work around that by just timing them with Forge Skills. Slippy does not last for 6 seconds, Forge Skills make us immune for 6 seconds, so we throw Slippy, then use our Forge Skill, and then we can survive it entirely. You can blow yourself up, sure, but only if you're not being careful with that specific order of operations. To get it for yourself then, it is a dedicated drop from Shadowpelt, who is the boss of the Whistler's Maw Augur Mine in the middle of the Terminus Range region. For our class mod then, we have the Shatter White Legendary mod. This only thing really matters on this is the +5 ranks of the Berserk passive. This is the only class mod that I've found that has ranks of Berserk on it, and this is the highest number of ranks that I've seen of Berserk on a class mod. The gun damage gets converted to bonus melee damage through our specialization, that's a bit of a bonus. The cryo damage is great for Berserk scaling specifically, but the actual legendary effect on this class mod does nothing for us at all in the slightest. As for how to get it, the Shatter White Legendary class mod is a dedicated drop from Origo, the Vault Guardian in the Terminus Range region. Following that, we've got our shield, which is the Heavyweight Legendary shield. This makes us consume any of our armor segments that we have when we melee to get 100% bonus melee damage. It's basically double damage when it triggers, but also this gives us a passive 50% melee damage increase when we have no shield segments. So this always is increasing our melee damage in some way or some form. We also can get modifiers on it like Spunky, which gives you up to 30% bonus damage dealt, scaling with armor segments that are broken, and we will have very broken armor segments frequently because we're going to be punching all the time as a melee build, which then consumes the armor segments. It is also important to note that this has some extra synergy too, because we do regenerate regenerate the segments very fast while Onslaughter is active, giving us more frequent bonuses of 100% extra melee damage, which in general is just very good. As for where to actually get this one, it is a dedicated drop from the Vile Prototype boss, who was unlocked during the story missions in the Terminus Range region. His replay machine is right here on your map. As for your enhancement then, the enhancement literally does not matter at all for melee damage, not even in the gun damage stat from enhancements seems to increase my melee damage in practice, even though logically you'd think it would. So enhancement, it just picks something good for the actual weapon that you'll be using on occasionally, because it doesn't change much for melee for us. Finally then we have our firmware in the build, and for this one it's honestly pretty simple. Real Big Fist, first bonus, increase melee damage, great. Second bonus, increase melee damage, great. Third bonus, melee kills trigger a Nova for 200% of the damage dealt, fantastic. This works with the Groundbreaker specialization in mobbing scenarios to essentially multiply our ramping damage when enemies are close to each other. Action Fist, first bonus, is more melee damage, which is fantastic. Second bonus is action skill damage. This only affects our Forgeskill and our Rocket Punch specifically, so while Onslaughter is active, but that's still reasonably solid of a bonus. The third bonus from this is also decent for the setup, but with the specific way that our build works, it's just not as good as the third bonus for Real Big Fist instead. That does it for how to put the build together then, so let's quickly talk about how to actually play it in practice. For mobbing in general, start fights with your Forgeskill to get Berserk rolling, throw a fish at the enemy and then activate Action Skill and start punching fools. Use your Forgeskill on cooldown both to refresh immunity and to give yourself extra Action Skill duration too, and Ordinance cooldown refresh. Try to hit as many enemies with it as you can as well. Throw your Ordinance whenever you are using your Forgeskill to make sure that you are immune to the Ordinance damage. Otherwise, just fly around punching fools in the face until they explode, and remember to use the follow-up Ice Cleave during Rocket Punch mode 2, as it helps a lot for mobbing. As for bosses specifically, the full setup for a boss burst is to start by using your rep kit, then fire off the target marker underbarrel at the boss, use your Forgeskill, and throw out all charges of the Slippy Grenade at the boss. This will ramp up There Is Only Red to being 10 stacks for maximum Berserk bonus damage. I don't do it in most of these clips, but the next step for full ramp up speed would be to swap to Spread Launcher and fire it point blank at the boss during Forgeskill's immunity period. If the boss is relatively stationary, you then just want to use normal punches to ramp up as quickly as possible. If they are mobile, instead you want to activate the Action Skill and Rocket Punch them down instead, so you can follow them around as they move. Use your Forgeskill on cooldown to keep up immunity and such. Use Slippy with the Forgeskills, and that's pretty much it. Some bosses are definitely tougher than others to burst down with melees. Some will die in a handful of hits. Others, especially those with shield-based health bars, which we're sort of weak against, will take a bit more doing. But the important part is that we have functional immortality as long as we can hit things, so slightly longer fights is just a really small factor. It's not that big of a detriment. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Your full guide to the new Forgeskill spam Amon UVH5 build, another melee build for Amon that creams the game. A lot of new stuff going on in here, lots of stuff that was buffed during the patch, and it's just a load of fun and a different way to play the character. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and I hope you enjoy trying it out for yourself in-game too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, I'm the conductor of the poop train! Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.